Morning. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Nazir Daf Mem Gimel, and we're starting just about halfway down. In my Gemara, I have the two dots. I know not all of the Gemaras do, so we're starting. Last words on the line is Tanu Rabbanon, followed with the words Lahechalo. We had learned a din yesterday about a goses, about a person who is on their deathbed, and we're going to be analyzing that din a little bit more, in particular as to whether or not there's an Isser Tuma in regards to a goses, as it relates to a Kohen. We know that a Kohen is not allowed to become Tamei Meis. If a Kohen is not allowed to become Tamei Meis, so is he allowed to be in the room with a goses who's not yet dead? This is a machlokes tanoim. Tanu Rabban and the rabbis teach us lahechalo. The full pasuk reads lo yitama ba'al be'amav lahechalo, that a Kohen is not allowed to become Tamei lahechalo. And we have a drasha ad shashi yamus. The drasha is that until death actually takes place, then that's when the Isser kicks in, meaning that it seems, from here at least, it seems that you are allowed to be in the room with a goses as a Kohen because they haven't died yet. Rabbi Omer b'mosam, he quotes a different pasuk in Yitama ad sheyamos. He can become tameh, meaning he can be in the room with them ad sheyamos until they die. So really, this looks like the same exact sheet as my Beinai. What's the difference between the Namar of Yochanan? Mashmos Darshan Ika Beinai. He says the only difference is the drasha. Where do we learn it from? According to Rabbi, we learn it from one pasuk. According to the Tanakh, we learn it from another. But Rish Lakish has a whole different spin on the psukim. And if we look at the words, we can see why there might be a difference between them. He says Rish Lakish Amar Goses Ika Beinai. There is a difference between the two shitas. The Mandamar Lahechalo. According to the Tanakh, who says we learn from the word Lahechalo, that word doesn't reference anything about Misa. Afilu Goses. So the din would be that he is even going to become tamei if there were to be a goses. And Lamanda Amar b'mosam, according to the shita of b'mosam, according to the Rebbe who holds that we learn from the drasha b'mosam, then ad yamus in goses lo. We're a little bit more than halfway down on Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, and here we have a machlokes tanoim. Is a Kohen who's in the room with a goses, a man who is about to die, is that going to be considered tumas meis for a Kohen? Yes or no? The Pashtus, with the Balabatish Svar, we would have assumed that a person would become Tamei, a Kohen would become Tamei only with death. And according to Reish Lakish, there's a Machlokes Tanaim about this. And that's where we are right now. So that's the Machlokes we just saw halfway down in Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, and we're picking up right here about a third from the bottom, 2/3 of the way down. According to the Tanakama, who has the word Milahechalo, so then Haksiv B'mosam, what does he do with the pasuk that says B'mosam? So what does that mean? According to the Tanakama, who says Milahechalo, if Rish Lakish is right, and Milahechalo means that a Kohen is not allowed to become Tameh, is not allowed to be in the room with a goses who's about to die. So what does he do with the pasuk Haksiv B'mosam? What about the next pasuk? So he says, don't worry, Rish Lakish would explain that the Tanakama, again, this is all within Rish Lakish, would understand the word b'mosam according to another drasha of Rabbi Tanya. Rabbi Omer b'mosam eno metame, avametame b'nega'asam uvizivasam. That it's taka true that a Kohen is not allowed to become tamei meis. It's true, but he is allowed to become tamei for negoim and for zav. That would not be the problematic type of tumah that we're talking about for a Kohen. But that's a problem because Rebbe was just quoted in the Brisa at the beginning of today's shiur, right at the middle of the page, and then Rebbe is quoted again using the same pasuk for two different things. If you look at the Brisa right at the Tanu Rabbanan, Rebbe says B'mosam teaches us that he can't be Tamei Meis, and over here we see that it means that he can become Tamei for Negoim and Ziva. So how can Rebbe use the same pasuk for two different things? So says the Gemara, Im Kain, 10 lines from the bottom, Lema Kra B'mos. My b'mosam. Why is it plural? I could have learned only one thing with it. The word was written in a more lean way without the extra letter. But now that it has the mem at the end, shamas minatarte, I can learn two things. The first thing I can learn, as Rebbe taught us in the beginning of the day, is that a Kohen cannot become tamei when the person's actually dead, but he can become tamei. He can enter the room when the person's a goses. And the second din that we learn is the din over here that a Kohen can be metamei for negoim and for ziva. Well, doesn't include the shiur. Right? That's the next page. That's the next page. That's the whole next amud. Yeah. Well, that's an open pasuk in Chumash that he's allowed to become tamei. Yeah, for sure. We'll have to see what some of the parameters are about that a little bit later. Well, the man damar b'mosam, and according to Rebbe, who used the word b'mosam, what does he do with the Tanakama's pasuk? So how does he learn? So it says the Gemara, don't worry. The Rebbe's plenty creative to teach me as follows. When do we say that a Kohen is not allowed to become Tamei? That's when he's never been Tamei. That's a chiddush. It seems to be from the Gemara that a Kohen who's ever become Tamei Meis no longer has the Isra of becoming Tamei Meis, which I hope I'm wrong, but I would imagine there are plenty of Kohanim that are Tamei Meis Forget about Eretz Amim. We all live in Chutz La'aretz. Eretz Amim is in the Rabbanon of Tumah no matter what. So for sure, Pasha made the Rabbanon all the Kohanim are. I guess is that how it works. I presume that's what Eretz Amim is. But here, what we're saying is a little bit different. We're saying that a person who's ever been Tamei Meis, so then if the Kohen, then there's no way for him to become Asur again. Says the Gemara, that's great that you came up with this clever answer, but what does the Tanakama do with the word lehechalo? It's being used twice for the same exact thing, same issue as before. It's being used for him to teach us that there's an isser to be with the goses because he's about to die, and it's being used over here to say that a Kohen can't become Tamei Meis twice. Once he's Tamei once, he can become Tamei again because there's no way to become Tamei twice. And the Gemara gives a similar structured answer as before. Why the extra letter shamas minatarte that the Tanakama could teach us two dinim from the word lehechalo. Din number one is that it's usher for a Kohen to be in the room with the goses lest he become tamei, or actually I should say he becomes tamei. He becomes tamei when he's in the room with the goses. And number two is that once a Kohen becomes tamei, he can't become tamei again. The Gemara questions this din meisvei. We quote from a brisa.
Like at that same time.
What?
There's no legally shiurim, so to speak. What does that mean? He becomes tamei, becomes tahor again.
It becomes tahor in the process again. In between, then for sure he's going to become tamei.
It just means
you can't stack it.
Shiurim,
right. Right. If I walk over one kever as a Kohen and then walk over another kever, you can't. You're already tamei. You can't make yourself more tamei. In other words, the isser is not the process of. It's the tumah. The isser is not the process of becoming tamei where I walk over a kever, but it's the isser of being tamei. So once you're tamei, you check the box already. You're done. Meisvei, the brisa writes, Adam eina metame ela ad shetetze nafsho. We have a brisa that says that a person will not become tamei until the person who he's with in the room, until there's yitzias hanefesh, yitzias haneshama. So that's very strict line. Ve'afilu meguyad, even if his body has been chopped up, Rachmana litzlan, a person was cut in a very dangerous way. Ve'afilu goses. Oh, so here we have black on white against Reish Lakish's understanding of the Gemara. According to Reish Lakish, his understanding of the brisa at the beginning of the page was a machlokas in the Tanai. That the Tanakama held that it's an isser deraisa for a Kohen to be in the room with the goses because he's looming to die. And according to Rebbe, there is no isser. You can be with the goses. But here, this brisa is black on white against the sheet of the Tanakama. According to the first sheet that we saw in the brisa at the middle of the page where it says lehechalo, and Reish Lakish explained it as an isser for a Kohen to be with a goses. We have black on white that a goses is there, that there's no tumah in that case. How can the Tanakama? How could Reish Lakish understand the Tanakama the way that he did to say that that there's an isser for a Kohen to be with a goses? Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom. You're right. When it comes to the isser of Timuye becoming Tamei, you're right, that's the Isser of Adanaf Gareshe. However, in regards to triggering the din of Lehechalo, which is seemingly different than Tuma, that's what the Gemara seems to say, Ad de Ischil. In regards to Lehechalo, he's already been with that person in the room. So apparently there's this subtle distinction between a goses and I should say within a goses, there's a difference between becoming tamei and the isra of lehechalo. It seems that with the goses, they're two separate things. You have an isra tuma and you have the isra lehechalo, which is being in the room with the goses, according to Reish Lakish's understanding of the brisa. It's its own thing. See, look at the bottom, the Rivan, the last line of Rashi. To have a goses, you've already violated the isra of lo yechalel. So lo yechalel is a bit of a broader isser. It's not only tumas meis, it's even being with someone who's about to die. And when you walk into that room as a Kohen, when the person's about to die, the machines are beeping, he's not dead yet, that's an isser d'oraisa. But the tuma is its own isser. So you're right, linyan tmuye, that's only with death. But the isser of lahachel, that's only true when there's someone who's about to die.
Getter normally.
I mean, we can't come.
Right.
You're not allowed to be in the room, not as a warning. But etzem, you can't be in the room. Isser d'oraisa.
This is more than a getter.
It's more it's conceptually a getter. Right. Yeah. So like really, if this plays out, and it looks like the Rambam quotes this actually, if this plays out, that means that the Monei HaMitzvos have two separate Isurim for Kohanim. There should be an Isser d'oraisa of Tuma, which is when somebody dies, and an Isser d'oraisa of Lehechalo, which is to enter the room when the person's a goses. It's only according to the way Reish Lakish understands the machlokas and the Gemara, because according to the first approach that we saw with Rabbi Yochanan, there's no machlokas between the two. They agree that goses is one din and meis is another. But according to Reish Lakish, and the Rambam seems to pass it this way. Yeah, mamish. It's exactly the same thing, which is koi belav de lo yechalel. Pretty big chiddush. Well, it's only a chiddush because we haven't been through Shas yet. Otherwise, this would have been something that we learned a long time ago. On the top of Mem Gimel Amud Beis, like Stan said, we're getting into some issues of family members. Amar Rav Chizda Amar Rav Nikta Rosho Shel Aviv Rachmana Litzlan. A person, a father had been decapitated. Eno Metamelo. So normally we know the pasuk in Chumash says you're supposed to be Metame for Aviv Limel, right? For all of his 7 family members, for all of his 7 krobim. But says the Gemara, it's not true for a father who has been decapitated. My taima Amar Kra LeAviv. When a father's body is chaser, so then the din is that he has no right to become tameh. So let's just play out one awful scenario. Let's say that, God forbid, someone was killed in a plane crash. So Lamaisa, can't assume that the body is necessarily intact. Let's assume halachically we assume that the body is not intact. The kid can't go to the funeral. That's what the Gemara says. We'll see it's a machlokes in the Gemara, machlokes tanaim, but that is what Amar Rav Chizda Amar Rav says. Let's say I'm going through this very dangerous path in Arvus. You're walking, a person's walking with their father, and the father gets decapitated. The son's not allowed to be matame from his father's right there. What are you supposed to do? Amar le makes mitzvah kamras. Come on, says the Gemara, and it articulates. Now that any person would have to bury, this Kohen can bury anyone. Forget about his father. But Aviv lo kol sheken.
Even made mitzvah outside, he's there. He's there when the
It's already tummy.
right. It's already coming.
No, you're not tummy, not necessarily.
If he doesn't touch it.
There's no tumas ohel.
It's not
There's no.
inside
You're not
the
inside a
house.
building. You're outdoors.
It makes it sound like he's walking in like an overhang. The feeling is that they're walking on a road.
No, there's not. There's nothing covering. Rashi says the pikta is a bika. It's just a valley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's no covering here. There's no tumas ohel. So he's not. If you're standing next to someone who dies, it doesn't make you tummy. It says
No problem.
there's no right. There's no, or it's either an ohel or you're being ma'ahil yourself over the mace. One of the two. So none of that happened. But here the Gemara says that's a classical case of mace mitzvah. You should bury anyone like that if you're a Kohen. It doesn't matter, for sure your father. So says the Gemara, "V'hai mace mitzvah." This is a classical case of mace mitzvah. So you can't ask from there. Says the Gemara, "Vatanya." Wait 1 second. That's not how we define mace mitzvah. I would have thought that's how we define mace mitzvah. So what then does the Brisa say? Ezu mace mitzvah kol she'ein lo kovrin. But the Brisa adds as follows: Korei va'acherim onanoso. If the person who's with the mace calls out to get help and others are able to help, ein zeh mace mitzvah. And in this case, va'isle bra, his son's with him. So if the Kohen is with his father, the father's decapitated. That's not yet a category of mace mitzvah. First, the son has to be korei. He has to try and find somebody else. If nobody answers, he's a mace mitzvah. But if somebody answers, call the chevra kadisha, you're not a mace mitzvah. Then you can't bury the father. That's the din of Rav. So that means it's not a case of mace mitzvah, which makes it a beautiful question that the Gemara had asked from Rav Hamnuna, that we see that he's still allowed to bury him. But why would you be allowed to bury him? That's the din of the drasha, that is la'aviv bizman shu shalav lo bizman shu chaser. It says the Gemara, a third of the way down, that once you're traveling on the path, once you're walking, especially in this place, but seemingly in any place, then it's kimisha ein lo kovrim dami, even without being korei, even without trying to call the chevra kadisha. A person's traveling the pikta de arvus, and there's Rahman al-Lisan, there's this type of injury. Things may be different with phones now, right? That's the new iOS for the Apple. They have this thing that even if you're in the middle of nowhere with no cell signal in an emergency, through the satellites, you can call anyone you want. Yeah. So says the Gemara, maybe the din has changed. Says the Gemara, pre-technology, what would we have known? Things change now. So now we have helicopters that pick people up in duress. So maybe things would change. But in the most simplest of terms, what seems to be over here is that there is a din of mace mitzvah over here. And therefore, that's not a good kasha of Rav Hamnuna, because it's a din of mace mitzvah. Okay, the Brisa writes, and we're going to be asking on Rav Chizda Amar Rav, just about halfway down, Allah Yitama, referring to the psukim about Lehei Chalo, but referring to a person's sister who's never been married. Lahu mitame, ve'enu mitame le'evareha. He's not allowed to become tameh. He's allowed to become tameh for her full body, but not for parts of her body. Lefi she'enu mitame le'evar minachai shalavi, for the same din, that just like the daughter and the father, they have the same din, that if there's a missing body part, so then seemingly they're not allowed to, you can't be tameh for a person who's missing a body part if you're a Kohen. Then the strange line of the Brisa, Aval Machzir hu al etzem kiseora, which is the minimum threshold of Tuma. So that doesn't make any sense. So says the Gemara, "My machzir al etzem kisora." What did the Brisa mean when it said al etzem kisora? Lav lememra di michzar purta. Doesn't it seem to be against Rav Chizda that the Brisa writes? You could see that you can return a part of the body that's etzem kisora. Let's say the end of the pinky, whatever, something small. But we see from the Brisa, black on white, that you're allowed to return it. We see that you're allowed to put it back in the kever with the father. So that should be a kasha and Rav Chizda. How could Rav Chizda have a drasha that says la'avi bisman shu shalom lo bisman shu chaser? Yet over here it says etzem kisora, you're allowed to return it. Stira. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not correct. Hahi Rabbi Hudahi. That shita of etzem kisor is Rabbi Huda. What does Rabbi Huda hold to Tanya? Rabbi Huda Omer, la mitama, you can become tamei for ve'enam tamei levareha, but you're not allowed to become tamei for one of her evarim. She'enu matame al ever min hachai shel aviv. Oh, that if there was something that was removed from the body when the father was alive, taka, you're not allowed to return it. Avol mitame hu le'ever min hameis shel aviv. But you are allowed to become tamei if a limb was removed after the father died. That's a distinction. Rabbi Huda is a matir if it's not Ever Min Achai, but rather Ever Min HaMeis. Not to be confused with the classical dinim of Ever Min Achai and Ever Min HaMeis. We're not talking about cannibalism. We're talking about, we're not talking about eating people. It's certainly not one's parent. But here we're just talking about when the limb was removed. So if before he died, somebody cut off his finger, so then that's a problem. Then you're not allowed to become tamei. But if after he died, Rahman al-San, there's an accident, he was already dead, and then something cut off a limb, that's mutter for the kohen to become tamei. It's just such a dakus halacha. You have to really know the halacha is being a kohen. But that's what the Gemara says, is that if the limb was removed after death, then the son can still become tamei for his father. Tani Rav Kahana, the Brisa writes, Rebbe Lazar ben Yaakov, lo mitama. We have to still understand the following Brisa. What does he say? Ve'enu matame levareha. He's not allowed to become tamei for his sister. Again, this is the sister who's never been married. Prat kazayis mina mace, except for if there's a kazayis of the mace, uchazayis netzel, or if there's a kazayis of netzel, which is bodily fluids, umelo tarvad rekev, or after a body has fully decomposed and it's really just more ash or the crumblings of what used to be a skeleton, umelo tarvad rekev, that a person is allowed to become tamei for that. We have to understand this, because how does that work according to Rav Chizda? Rav Chizda says if you're missing anything, you can't. We have to figure this out. But the Brisa continues that yachol, you might have thought lo yitama, that you wouldn't become tamei l'shedra u'legolgolas u'lerov binyana u'lerov minyana, that you're not allowed to become tamei if a person finds their sister's spine, u'legolgolas for their skull, u'lerov binyana their torso, u'lerov minyana most of the bones of their body, right over the halfway point. So it says the Gemara, Kasuv, the Torah writes, V'amarta alehem, it says it twice in that pasuk, right? V'amarta alehem, famous Rasha. Hosiv l'chal Kasuv tuma cheres, another heter for tuma that is entering into this space. That's mutter. So we see that these things are all mutter. Yachal lo yitama l'shidru l'golgol tzarov binyano l'rov minyano shelacher. And what about other people who you are allowed to become tamei for? All the seven. Says the Gemara, Amres ma'achosam yuchedes shegufa talui bo metamei l'shidru u'legolgolas u'lerov binyana u'lerov minyana. Just like a sister has something unique about her, that in regards to her body, a kohen, the brother, can become tamei for all of these body parts, for the spine, the skull, the torso, and for most of the bones in her body. Afkol shegufo talui bo. Anyone who's in that list, then he can become tamei l'shidru l'golgolas or l'rov binyano or l'rov minyano. And here we have 8 examples in this brisa, whatever the number is, of cases that don't work for Rav Chizda. A tarvad, you can get a spoonful of the body, a kazayis of mace, a kazayis of netzel. Everything you can come. How could Rav Chizda possibly be right? How could that was the thing we started on the top of Mem Gimel Amud Beis? Lo aviv is mashu shalom, lo is mashu chaser. What about these brisas? They're filled with things that are partial body parts. Yeah, they're filled with them. So says the Gemara, simple answer, Hahinami Rabbi Huda. We're all talking about cases where it's after they died. This comes up Lamais. I'll tell you where it comes up. A friend of mine called me from England and said that he had a family member here in Chicago who had passed away, Chevra Kadisha, and they wanted me to try and help with Simcha Frank to try and make sure that there was no autopsy. So I was speaking with this person in the autopsy office, the medical examiner. They said, no matter what, we always draw fluids. That would be the nafkamina. When is the fluid drawn? After death. So then a son can still become tamei to that. Then it wouldn't be a problem. So all the fluids are drawn prior to death. That's a problem. If the fluids are drawn after death, that would be mutter according to Rabbi Yehuda, because it's after death. It's Ever Min HaMeis. So that's the first part of this answer, that Hahinami Rabbi Yehuda, that the din the din of this previous bride said that a brother can become tummy for a sister for all of her individual body parts. That's obviously Rabbi Huda. And what about Virav? What does Rav mean? So if you look at the very top line of Mem Gimel Amud Beis, Amar Rav Chizda Amar Rav, it's really Rav who is the source of this din, that a father can only be buried in full and not in part. The Rav da Amar Ki Haitana. Rav was actually dealing with a different issue. What was the different issue? Titania. A person lost his father, and someone came over to him and said, after 3 years that his father had died, your father died. He's a Kohen, so can he tend to the body? So he asked a bunch of zakenim, no, you're not allowed. It says the Gemara, no problem. Says the Gemara, but that's the kasha, because the body was for sure in parts at that point.
Right.
So now that the body's in parts, why would that be mutter?
What was he doing?
Right, but you can't become tamei meis. He hadn't been buried properly yet. So that was the kasha of the Gemara, is that we don't understand how Rav Chizda Rav really can fit with all of these Marim Makomos. So what we see now is a clear set of parallel paths in the approach to tumas meis with a partial body, according to Rav Chizda Amar Rav, and according to the Chamesh Zakenim that we saw right before the Mishnah on Mem Daled Amud Aleph. All of them are of the opinion that it's la'aviv, but only when the body is full, and they're makbid gomer. But according to the track of Rabbi Yehuda says no, as long as it's removed after death, that's not considered problematic. It's only Eiver min achai, when it's removed from the father before he dies, and then the son who's a Kohen wants to go to the funeral, that's problematic. So that's the split between these two shitas. That's Mem Gimel Amud Beis. We'll stop right here, and Mir Tashem will pick up tomorrow night with the new Mishnah on Mem Daled Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a freilich and pur.
Just read that